Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Megan Corrado. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. For those that don't know AFP, we're a membership-based organization. We have over 250 members working to prevent conflict and build peace in 181 countries all over the world. We're so thrilled that you could join us here today, and we are equally as delighted to be partnering with one of our most valued members and colleagues from the International Civil Society Action Network, known as ICAN, to put on this event today. So as you know, we are coming up any day now on the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. So back in 2000, October 31st, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1325, which laid the framework for the WPS agenda. And while significant attention has been paid to recruiting and retaining women in security forces and peacekeeping missions, as well as rightfully creating conditions that can facilitate their role, such as through efforts to prevent and prosecute sexual assault amongst their ranks, less so has been paid to the role of women civil society organizations and peacebuilders as security actors and partners. With the proliferation of security threats around the world, it is a missed opportunity to marginalize women from these efforts to prevent and combat them. Our speakers today will delve into the findings of the recent report by ICAN and articulate clear recommendations about how to center security within communities and partner with trusted actors like women peacebuilders to achieve both human and national security aims. Achieving these aims will not be easy, as states are shifting away from supporting peacebuilding and increasing military spending. Civic space is under threat globally, and the gains of women everywhere are backsliding. While the WPS agenda has not achieved all of its goals in its nearly 25-year history, it offers a clear framework to address all of these challenges. And today, we will explore how the WPS agenda can advance security sector reform and reduce the need for securitized responses globally. Just quickly, I'll introduce our speakers, and then we will get right into the main content here. So first up, we will have Sanam Nagari-Andolini. She's the founder and CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network. She's having some technical issues, so she cannot join us. We will have her colleague, Isabella Karibajanian. She's the publications coordinator and editor with ICAN. We'll also have Wasma Farog, peacebuilding practitioner and human rights lawyer, founder of Women in Peace Studies Organization Canada. And last but not least, we'll have Matsu Alamin. She's the founder and executive director of the Alamin Foundation for Peace and Development. Today, we will provide space for an in-depth discussion on findings from ICAN's report, The Odd Couple, Women Peacebuilders and Security Actors, Bridging Positions, Building Trust. Our speakers will share insights and mobilize steps to strengthen trust and collaboration between peacebuilders and security actors with practitioners and allies, all of you here today. So not seeing Sanam, I will turn it over to our colleague Isabella, who will give us a brief overview of the report, and then we'll hear from two extraordinary women peacebuilders who contributed to the report about their experiences as well. Isabella, over to you.
Hi there, can you hear me? I'm actually going to pass it to my colleague Helena, who will frame the project, and then I'll jump in with the key findings and recommendations from the report.
Thank you so much, Isabella, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you joining us here today. My name is Helena Grunberg, and I'm a program director at the International Civil Society Action Network, ICAN for short. And as we wait for Sanam, who we still hope will join, I just wanted to say a couple of words about our work and specifically our work with the security actors over the years. So ICAN spearheads an alliance, the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, which is a global network of women peacebuilders in around 40 plus countries currently, with 90 plus organizational and individual members. And several of our partners, including Wajma and Hamsatu, who will be speaking here today, have for decades already been engaging with security actors in their own context, Afghanistan and Nigeria. And ICAN has been supporting that kind of work for quite some time as well, both by connecting policymakers and security actors at the global level with our partners on the ground and hosting meetings and discussions in that regard. And as we know, the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda, as Megan mentioned, is turning 25 this year. And we know that it's proven and vital entry point for women peace builders to engage with security actors and build trust within affected communities. And these efforts are contributing to the reform of the sector and reshaping local security environments, as well as mitigating violence. But we also know that challenging police and military impunity can make women peace builders targets in their work. At the same time, also security forces in many contexts, including in democratic ones, are being deployed to suppress peaceful protest and dissent, eroding public trust. And as those of you, based in the US have seen, this is very much at the forefront of what's happening here. And in these cases, this also, of course, mistrust or fuels mistrust and vigilantism and deepens community tensions. So back in 2024, in March of 2024, actually, ICAN, in partnership with the Permanent Mission of Norway to the United Nations, the permanent missions of UK to the United Nations, our Canadian colleagues, our South Sudan colleagues, as well as several our civil society partners, joined forces in New York to organize a meeting between security actors at New York level, at UN level, and several of our organizational partners who have been working with security sector to create a space to discuss challenges, discuss initiatives, collaboration, and come up with actionable recommendation. And out of this meeting, we then published the Odd Couple report, which is the report that sort of frames the conversation for today. And I think especially in this current context, when we are seeing that, the funding for peace building is shrinking, we see an increase in militarism, in military spending, we really need to recognize the importance of collaboration and the importance of collaborating between sectors. So with that, I'll give it over to Isabella, who's going to give us an overview of the report and specifically its main findings and some of the challenges and opportunities that we found. So with that, over to you, Isabella.
Thanks, Helena. And in our discussions in New York, we centered our conversations around three main strands. We looked at preventing violent extremism, confronting election-related violence, opportunities for security sector reform. And those are the three core themes that we draw on in the Odd Couple report, which I encourage all of you to read. And our report really centers actionable recommendations drawn from these conversations between women peace builders and security actors in New York, but also throughout ICAN's work with our Women's Alliance for Security Leadership. We have four core recommendations to security sector policymakers, as well as practitioners and scholars. That begins with first reframing and considering national security to include human and community-centric approaches instead of just limiting the focus to militarization. As Helena mentioned, we've seen traditional security approaches are unable to confront the multifaceted and compounding crises of today. And so we recommend de-siloing the approach to national security and instead reimagining what security means. So in our report, we draw from some practices within our Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, including community policing practices in Sri Lanka, including really interesting work being done in Colombia on this program called Secure Here and Now, which completely redesigns what security means to incorporate more personal, cognitive, emotional, political, spiritual dimensions. And we also draw from practice that we see in policy, such as the Boe Declaration on Regional Security. So this recommendation centers security as a public service that's accountable to and inclusive of all communities. And I'm sure you'll hear more about this with Hamsatu and Wajma's work. Our second core recommendation from the report recognizes civil society as allies, not adversaries to security forces in addressing community security, including through tackling polarization and fostering social cohesion. So we find that strategic trusting partnerships between women peace builders and security actors can create an ecosystem type approach where everyone's strengths are drawn on to confront challenges like violent extremism, election-related violence, and security sector reform. So security agencies can partner with civil society led initiatives that prevent violence and instability. So our report's dedicated to our colleague Soraya Roble, who unfortunately passed away shortly after our meeting in Albania last summer, and she pioneered these innovative police cafes in Kenya that created a space for communities to regularly meet with their local police, share concerns, and develop best practices for community security. That's one of the best practices we highlight in the report. We also touch on Hamsatu's work, which we'll speak more about soon, about surrender pathways for disarmament and de-radicalization in Nigeria. Our third recommendation in the report is to convene exchanges and opportunities for dialogue between women peace builders and the security sector at national and international levels. So we recognize that the unique role and expertise of women peace builders in addressing security concerns need a platform. We need to invest in structured, systematic opportunities for dialogue so that these locally led solutions can filter upwards to these global institutions. This recommendation emphasizes heeding the warnings and solutions that women peace builders raise among rising insecurity and fragility, and actively involving women peace builders in creative pathways and spaces where they might not always be thought of. So not just the Women, Peace and Security Week spaces, but UN Police Week or other higher level security consultations. And our last recommendation is to bridge legal and accountability gaps by reforming laws and fostering justice. In our report, we talk a lot about the double-edged sword it is to engage with security actors as women peace builders, both in the important opportunities it provides for enhancing community security, but also in the space of, they could lead to retribution. It could lead to increased insecurity for women peace builders or their communities. So by bridging these accountability gaps, and developing local, national, and international accountability mechanisms, we find that that's a core piece of the puzzle. So we provide examples of this, again, such as our colleague Visaka's work in Sri Lanka with community policing, different mechanisms that states have instituted for themselves, such as Australia's Royal Commission to address police violence and war crimes committed in Afghanistan. So this is just a taste of the report. It's filled with rich examples, and when it seems impossible, I always look at this report and I think there are women and civil society actors all around the world coming up with innovative solutions to the world's thorniest challenges, and it's time for this odd couple pairing really to come into fruition and take shape, because it's up to both sides of the coin to talk to each other in order to build better community security practices for all. But that's enough from me, I think. I'm excited to hear from Wajma and Hamsatu, so thank you so much, and I'll drop the link in the chat again.
Great. Thank you so much, Isabella and Helena, for framing the report and some of the major recommendations and outcomes, both from it and the workshop that led to the report. So appreciate you both jumping in. Really excited to hear from our local peace builders, but first, just in terms of run of show. So we'll hear from both Hamsatu, and Wajma. We'll do a couple rounds of questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on them as we go. And hopefully we'll have some time for some engagement from the audience. So thanks again to everyone for joining. And first up, Hamsatu, I'd like to delve into a couple questions with you. So you have rich expertise and a deep background in human rights, preventing violent extremism, and gender-sensitive peace building in Nigeria. In the report, you're quoted as observing how in Nigeria, security actors can actually become part of the problem and worsen radicalization trends. Can you please speak more to this observation, especially when it comes to the gendered impacts of violent extremism?
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us and then coming to listen to the voices of women peace builders. I will just off my camera while I speak to you to save the weapons. Yes, as Megan has rightly said, that's what I observed. And then it all started during the early days of the Boko Haram insurgency. I am from northeastern Nigeria. I am a native Kanuri, born and brought up in that context. So when these boys became radicalized, indoctrinated, and become violent extremists, they were still living within our communities in their parents' houses. So as the violence escalates, the Nigerian government responded militarily by creating what they call the Joint Task Force of uniformed men. And these uniform personnel are all placed within the communities at strategic positions. So these boys will come out and then attack the security agencies and then disappear back into their homes. So out of frustration, these security agencies started, in fact, mismanaging the situation. Whenever there is an incident, then you will see them, in fact, committing even arsons, setting people's houses on fire. Anybody who runs and comes out, if you are a male child, in fact, if you run away, you are automatically shot dead. And if you stand, you are arrested. And when you are arrested, that's the end of you. As I am talking to you now, we are in the 16th year of this violence. And to date, there is no accountability, no information on those who are arrested. And then, so these are the kind of situation then which in part led my fellow women in the communities, in communities where Boko Haram has heavily recruited, to start even joining the Boko Haram. And then they started encouraging their younger sons to join and even recruiting for the extremists. So the government's intervention, instead of helping to stem the tide of violence, it rather aided the recruitment base of the insurgents. And then, as the military mismanagement also continues, movement started saying Nigerian soldiers are worse than Boko Haram. It was a very, very difficult situation for me as a peace builder, seeing what young men in my community has turned to be, and then how the security agents are being perceived by my community. So therefore, in this kind of situation, that is how, in fact, why are these women doing it? It is they want to take vengeance from the excesses being committed by the soldiers on our community. So therefore, with this situation at hand, everybody was running away. I have to sit down and then start mobilizing victims and survivors of the conflict, as there is nobody, no listening, no INGOs, no reporters, no nothing. So I started mobilizing victims and survivors, educating my fellow women. There are better ways of doing these things and then seeking for our rights rather than joining the extremist group. In fact, I struggle a lot to pull down many women of my own age out of the extremist circle and then created what we are a victims and survivors network. As I am talking to you, I have 13 different networks of victims and survivors that includes mothers and wives of victims of enforced disappearances, former detainees, men, women, and children, and then the survivors of the extremist abduction and sexual slavery, who after being rescued by the Nigerian military in the course of counterterrorism operations or run away from the extremist enclave, they fall into the same ordeal in the hands of the Nigerian military. So much so that these women will now tell you, as these extremists also move out of the city to the bushes, then the Nigerian military started even arresting their mothers and family members, fellow women, into their cells. So the abuses on women became on several dimensions. As I'm talking to you, my social network has now over 47,000 registered members in that. So with support from the Foreign Commonwealth Office in 2020, and then I was tasked with the responsibility of, in fact, leading in an transitional justice initiative. So it is in this initiative already I have the victims and survivors all in my hands, and then the military and then the security actors who are the major challenge. So my whole problem now is how do I reach to these security forces? Because even myself, I was once arrested by the Nigerian military and kept for hours. Nobody could go and bail me out. And then one of my sons coming back from school with his friends, one of them was shot dead, another was shot in the lap. My son was beaten almost near death until when I was called to now rescue him. So these are the situation of in that period, in fact, which makes women in my community see the Nigerian military as worse. But then, as an educated person who has benefited from the public funds, then I said, how can I now make these security agencies realize the kind of consequences they are bringing on themselves and then the community at large? Because as men and women who have signed with their blood and life to save to protect our territorial integrity and then ensure our safety and security, this is how they are perceived. And nobody could tell them, because even to me, in fact, our relationship is purely that of fear and apprehension. I fear them, and then they are apprehensive about me, and then calling me all sorts of names within the security cycle: bloody woman who exposes secrets and then who leaks information to human rights organizations and others. So this is how we are. So until now, when I got this funding from FCDO, it strengthened me. Of course, the International Civil Society Action Network has been funding me to support my survivors and victims. So therefore, and then with the LSF now, that is the Lake Chad Basin for forces created by still the FCDO. Now these people started to broker a relationship between me and the Nigerian military. And then gradually we are able to come together. So when we came together now, I had now an opportunity to reach them. In fact, this is what I have been praying for, because you will never seek a solution to what you don't know. And now I have gotten the opportunity. And now the British government has come with a program to assist in training the Nigerian military forces on human security. And then this LFS force now, being a partner of the FCDO, they co-opted me to lead in that section of women, peace, and security in the human security sector. So that is how now I came to be part and parcel of that team, being seen with the internationals, training the Nigerian security forces. And therefore, it now gave me an ample opportunity, a golden opportunity now to present, because I have all the evidences. I have all the data in my hands. So now I can, when I talk, it is evidence-based. And then when asked, I can bring nobody can dispute what I said, because Amnesty International have been reporting, Human Rights have been, Watch has been reporting, but every time they report, it is being denied. The report is just thrown away. So therefore, now mine is practical with all the data, and then the women behind me are now started presenting, taking some of these survivors to the training, so that when I take them through the women, peace, and security agenda on protection, prevention, and others, then I bring in the survivors now to tell their stories. It's not me telling it or any international organization. These are the real people who are affected now telling them. In fact, one of the network is that of mothers of invisible children, children who are conceived and born while their mothers were in captivity, in detention in the military facilities. So these women will now come with their babies and then narrate their stories. In fact, they are in hundreds, not 1 or 10, they are in hundreds. So there is no way people can deny it. That is how the Nigerian military came to now appreciate the kind of thing I bring about, and then in fact, and then the difference I am making. And then I became now a real partner. They have now connected me to the highest echelon of the military. At a point, they have to call me, Hamza, to come and let us understand. At first, I don't have any platform. I don't have any avenue to reach them. But then with my victims and survivors, I mobilize them to come out and then observe international commemorative days to raise awareness in case we may reach them until this opportunity came about. So do I continue from here, or are you can I continue with the result or whatever I have achieved as a result of this training? Megan.
Thank you, Hamza.
Megan?
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciate your comments and framing just the varied impacts of security actors and how they interact with and can create harm for women and girls, and the ways in which your organization is doing some incredible work to mitigate
But
that.
I haven't talked about the impact. Maybe later.
That sounds great.
What I have achieved.
Perfect. Well, I think we'll move to Wajma, and then we'll come back and open it up.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And welcome, Sanam. Good to see you. we'll open it up to some additional questions for the whole group in just a few minutes. So Wajma, you are a renowned global voice on human rights, peace building, and gender equality from Afghanistan. You have created and mobilized an extensive network of local women peace builders from all over Afghanistan and now the world. We'd love to hear some of the key lessons you've learned from the Afghan context in terms of collaboration between security actors and women peace builders. And, we know Afghan women have long been in this role. Even before the Taliban takeover, they were often the ones, negotiating access to a bridge to get students to school or get to the market and things like that. And so we know their roles have been expansive and diverse. And would also just love to hear about some of the successes you saw when Afghan women peace builders collaborated with security actors.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Megan, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's joining us. I just saw in the chat a lot of people who are working on the same issues around women, peace, and security are joining us. It just feels so good to be among so many of people that we all have a common goal. In Afghanistan, as you know, NATO had for 20 years had a very strong presence because the role was very much to build the capacity and the functions of the Afghan security forces. So it was around 2007, actually, 2006, 2007, when the safety became much more problematic. Like the safety was very bad for women and girls and within the communities. And then we used to see that thousands of men are being recruited into the security forces, the Afghanistan National Security and Defense Forces. And while we have, for example, a lot of money going into the security sectors, but on the ground, families are not able to send their daughters to school. There's a lot of community-based murders and a lot of theft, a lot of, instability that was happening, a lot of tug wars that we had. So one of the reasons, because we were working within the communities and this kept coming to us, it impacted our work. So we started an initiative, I remember calling a community dialogue. It was between the community members, we had the principals, school principals, people from the municipality, workers, people who were working with it, but mostly the civilian government. And everybody was talking about their challenges with the police, challenges with the security sector, that the police is not providing the safety that they need, or the police is actually involved with these local attacks and local mafias, or, for example, those who are creating instability. So that keep coming to us. And to be very honest, there is this understanding. We were very much concerned not to engage with security sector because NATO was there as well. And there was this fear that, okay, if we engage with security sector, we might be labeled as them being co-opted by them. So, and we don't want to look like that. We are civil society. We want to be looked very much, kind of impartial. But we had no other option than to start, talking to them. And so we started those community dialogues, and we invited very much the district police chiefs from different districts. And we connected the community. So the school principals started talking to the district chief, telling him about the challenges that they were having, or, for example, the municipality was talking to them. And we realized that even within the government, other parts of the civilian parts of the government are not actually engaging with the security sector. So we were like the bridge gapping, creating that bridge between the civilian government and the national security and defense forces. So it started very much from that, but we also engaged very much in with the NATO forces. And it was so interesting that when we started getting engaged with the NATO, the gender advisor started telling us that your engagement with NATO actually opened up, it activated our roles because we had literally nothing to do. The gender advisors that are part of NATO, because they were living in a compound that they could not even get out. It was all very much, barricaded. They could not talk to anybody outside. And when you entered, NATO, they had these guidelines for their soldiers, particularly, or their, members, that do not talk to Afghan women, do not shake hands with Afghan women, do not, engage with anybody or families So they had a very strict kind of rule because they used to think that this actually creates, that's what the man had told them, that stay away from the women because it can actually put you, at risk. This is an honor issue to talk to an Afghan woman or to shake her hand, and then that would actually put NATO at risk. And then we started engaging with them, and from our work was, and those community dialogues started up. They brought in their gender advisors. Then we kind of opened up the space for other members of the community actually to come and tell them what are those sources of insecurity that, for example, they needed to deal with. So the role was very much about creating, it was very much situational awareness. That's what the language they use in NATO, situational awareness or situational analysis. So they started understanding what were the patterns of insurgency. For example, the groups of women that worked in Kandahar, we connected them with the NATO forces, with the Canadian Armed Forces, for example. We took them literally to the airport so they could meet with them and tell them that why do they have these, suicide bombings, for example, every week that was happening, why these young men are part of or joining the insurgency. So a lot of, that sharing information, not very much, from an intelligence perspective, but from a community perspective, that actually helped a lot. And on the other hand, we also opened up the door for women engagement into the security sector. What we did was, for example, because they needed to identify these security challenges within the community, but they did not have female security personnel. So they needed to have women. And then they came to us and they said, okay, how do we start recruiting women? And we were the ones who started, doing campaigns in our communities, because there's a lot of taboo being a female police officer and a lot of risk that's associated with them. We went to schools, for example. We started kind of recruiting a lot of women within the security sector, particularly within the police, created these family response unit, the FRUs, for example, where a police station started, opening up its space for other community members, and it was all staffed with women. So, that opened up the space for other women to engage. And I will come to other discussions on the impacts, but there are many lessons to be learned from Afghanistan, because 20 years of NATO engagement in Afghanistan, particularly establishing a 350,000 armed forces, with like 10% of women in it, but at the same time, how we started literally opening the doors of NATO to make NATO a bit of a more, like NATO started bringing its WPS guidelines in 2008 after our, push for it, because they started realizing that, yes, we need to work with communities because there's a lot of overlap between our objectives. So there is a lot of lessons learned there. But what I also learned in Afghanistan was that all of this was very much, time focused in a way that it was very based on small short-term projects, and it was not an enabled process. And I mean that, the resources that we lacked, for example, in terms of protecting the protectors, protecting the female police, for example, protecting the women peacebuilders who were engaging with them. For example, right now, many women who engaged with the NATO, engaged with the female police, for example, in security sector, they are at huge risk because of the political change that happened in Afghanistan. But to conclude this, I want to say that the relationship that we started with the security sector, it also helped with the stability. Like, it brought the level of crimes down at a very a minimum level, because the community started supporting, community started bringing their issues to the police, the family response unit started opening up its doors for women. But at the same time, the responsibility for safety and security within the security sector got much more, nationalized. They started talking to people, and they started engaging with the civilian government that even was not the case before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wajma. Yeah, and it's interesting because the United States government often cites, a huge advance in the WPS agenda here by having women from the U.S. military forces start talking to Afghan women in the communities, and what kinds of intelligence came out of that was incredibly impactful for their work. So interesting to see the impacts go two ways as well. Sanam, welcome. We had Helena and Isabella give us an overview of the report, but would love to bring you into the conversation as well. So, as you know, WPS and peacebuilding has always been grossly underfunded. However, funding cuts to both continue to rise in favor of increased military spending. How might this impact some of the incredible work that Satu and Majma and other of the ICAN network are engaged in now?
First of all, thank you for hosting us, and apologies for being late. I had a bit of a personal emergency, sandwich generation of family issues, but really happy to be here and really grateful to my colleagues, both Helena and Isabella, for giving the framework, and for Wajma and Hamsatu to really kind of illustrating these issues from the ground up. Look, the way that we're seeing these issues right now is that so on the one hand, the funding cuts that we're seeing are profoundly impactful, right? Because it's not just USAID, it's also been the knock-on effect of the UK and the Europeans and essentially the entire infrastructure of ODA that has been the norm for the last, whatever, 80 years, since the end of World War II. So the effect is we're feeling it. And I think that next year or next fiscal cycle, 26, 27 and onwards, things are going to get worse because that's what the government, our typical donors and partners are telling us. Now, that said, I think that when we look at it from the standpoint of local organizations and specifically local women's peacebuilding organizations, you see a slightly different framing, right? So I've been asking the question, for example, that when we say $40 billion of USAID money has been cut, really how much of that 40 billion was reaching organizations like Hamsatu's or Afghan organizations right now on the ground, Wajma working inside Afghanistan, or others that are local independent organizations? Because we in our sector have for long said that there was a need for reform. There was a need for reversing the way in which money, where did the money would get allocated, but how much of it would actually reach the ground, and how many, sort of intermediaries were there, and so forth. So this is that I think is a big question, that how much of it was the extra paper layers and how much of it is really what we need on the ground for the work to get done. The sad thing is that by doing the cuts in the way that they have, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, effectively, right? So they're not actually, the cuts aren't really being done to enable efficacy and efficiency and impact on the ground. There's a political agenda, and we can talk about that if needed. So that's one thing. The second thing is that if we think about buckets of money, if you want, the security bucket is gigantic. It's a big old, it's endless. The development and humanitarian bucket was much smaller always. And then within that, humanitarian crises trumped development, essentially. And peace building was always such a thin slice anyway, right? And so as this bucket shrinks, of course, peace building is really feeling the pinch because it was always the sort of second, third poor cousin anyway. And then again, women's peace building organizations are way down the line. What we're experiencing, and with this particular piece of work that we published, and the type of work we've supported our partners doing in the last 10 years around engaging the security sector at a local level, is that we're actually showing and verifying that the nature of crises and the complexity of security threats right now is such that the military actors alone or the security actors alone cannot cope with them. They need and they want the partnership with civil society in different ways. When we launched the report in Kosovo at the annual Women, Peace and Security Conference in Kosovo earlier this year, I did a roundtable with security with one of the generals of KFOR, the Kosovo forces that international forces that are still in Kosovo. And it really felt as if we had prepared, and collaborated in preparing our talking points. We hadn't. I'd never met the man before. But the first thing that he said was that in the last 25 years, the concept of peace, the concept of security, and even the concept of women has changed in global discourse. But his point was that based on traditional definitions of peace, Latin America is a continent of peace. There are no wars there, except that they're the highest levels of violence there because of gang warfare and other things. Security from the standpoint of your traditional military and police actors and so forth is they're able to provide one set of security services, if you want. But when you end up with whether it's violent extremism that's rooted and embedded in our communities, as we heard from Hamsatu and as we've seen with the Taliban, or it's organized crime right now, which is coming and it's transnational. It's no longer about it's not just gang warfare in the traditional way. It's now Venezuelan gangs that are coming into places like Trinidad. They have no commitment or any sort of connection to the society there. So they have no incentive to make things better on the ground. They're just there purely for extraction, right? We're in our partners' networks, we're seeing this kind of security threat in South Africa and in other places. Climate change issues, biosecurity issues, like we saw with the pandemic. None of these kinds of security threats can be dealt with by the military alone. None of them are going to be resolved for any of us just because we have, fancy drones with nuclear warheads or more weapons in our hands or more fancy tanks. We are kind of pouring our money into a sector and into essentially private companies that have their own incentive for this, for profit incentives, without actually matching them to the reality of the security threats that we're facing, or the range of actors that you need to address those things preventively from the ground up across the world. And in a way, for us, this conversation is kind of trying to create the space to show that through the WPS agenda, which is now a global agenda, and many countries are claimed to support it. Over 50% of UN member states have national action plans, as we know. But this piece of it about women peacebuilders engaging with security actors is a piece that really hasn't been supported. It really hasn't received any sort of emphasis or attention. And for us, this has been a really critical piece across our network. And so I think that from that angle, when we look at it, what we're saying is the security actors need us, as you've seen from Hamsatu and from the story of Afghanistan, and whatever the failures were from the American side or from the NATO side, we can talk about that. That was, to me, more of a political decision than from the security actors. But we're seeing it, in Kenya, in Pakistan, across in South America right now, in Colombia and elsewhere. We have our partners engaging with their own national security actors, and the effects are really interesting. And I hope that you'll hear from Hamsatu what actually she's able to do. So there is huge potential there. And then finally, I would say that what we're also saying, advocating for, is that peace building and this type of approach, which I call instead of securitizing humanity, what we're talking about is humanizing security. And this approach of humanizing security, to me, is indicative of the fact that the resources that we are now pouring into the security sector and into our Defense Department and Ministry of Defense here in the UK and elsewhere should actually be sort of partly repositioned or addressed in a way that supports peace building and sort of human security approaches and community security approaches to peace building. So the funds in ODA are contracting, the funds into the security sector are expanding, and actually where we should be talking about is saying these are the same taxpayers' funds, and peace and security. If we think about WPS and we think about where our resources should come, we should be engaging the security actor both in terms of reimagining security, reimagining and providing solutions for security threats in a more holistic and community-based way, and humanizing that security. And also, of course, making sure that the resources are coming to people on the ground who are really risking their own lives to do some of the most dangerous work out there. So I'm hoping that that's really where we take these conversations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonam. That's my new favorite term, humanizing security. We've heard human security, which has become increasingly more popular, at least in the US, because of sort of these political challenges around the term gender, but humanizing security, because it's about all of us and it's about all sectors that need to be involved. And yeah, I think at AFP, we've talked about integrating peace building funding into development work, into humanitarian work, because you can't achieve the aims of those sectors without having the stability to do that work. But it's so critical to the security sector. We're not going to achieve positive peace and security. Sorry,
and just to add to that, part of this, so again, two sort of small points, but actually kind of paradigm kind of shift thinking. So one is that WPS was never just about, oh, we want women in the security sector because we want to give them equal opportunity. That's fine. That's a very traditional kind of women's rights approach to things. WPS was actually about transformative equality. It was saying that we don't want our sons or our daughters, but including our sons or our husbands or father, the men in our lives, we don't want them having to experience the hell of war. So it's about prevention of war. It's about transformation of conflict non-violently, right? So that I think is a really critical aspect of thinking about how WPS helps with these things. And then the second thing is that in the last 25 years, since 9/11, what we've seen is government after government across the world instrumentalizing their military to deal with political issues. And again, this is a point where we see so much compatibility between when we engage with security actors and peace builders, because these are, who are they? They are also the men and the boys and the husbands and the fathers of our own societies, and they're being sent off to implement programs or policies that they, it's more about the politics as opposed to the reality on the ground. Whether we talk about dealing in Afghanistan or Iraq or how, we've been dealing with violent extremism around the world, the politics behind it is more flawed. And then it's the military actors who are paying the price for that, and communities that are paying the price for that. So we're trying to say, let's bring them to the table and, as I say, humanize both sides to each other, but also to change the way we think about how security should be addressed. So,
thank you. Yeah, and well, and you raise a really important point that prevention was always one of the core pillars of the WPS agenda, and it has been so deprioritized across the board. And even in exactly what we're talking about, the increased military spending, that's response, that's not prevention. But we can use those resources in a way that includes, local women peace builders and organizations to do that preventative work. But this report is so helpful because it really fills that gap, that evidentiary gap, and I think will help us all be better advocates as we move forward. So we'd love to throw it back to Hamsatu, just to hear a little bit more about some of the core impacts of your work, as well as lessons learned and recommendations that you would have for other women peace builders, donors, and the international community.
Thank you very much. In fact, we have had a lot from Sanam about this increased funding to. In fact, it looks like to us from this complex or broken or fragile context, is like an acknowledgement from the most powerful of the world, who have all the resources that the world cannot do without wars. And when you now give more funding to this sector, what you are doing is creating more wars and then giving a chicken feed in the name of humanitarian interventions to douse the effect of this. And then in the long run, cutting the funding from removing women, that the people who are fighting to build that peace or return or reconcile communities at wars. So in a nutshell, then we are witnessing more grievances, more frustrations, more abuses across. But then for us, women peace builders, with the little resources at hand, we have done our best and then achieved a lot, I can say, in the context we are operating. Because in the context of Nigeria, in fact, even the perception of who a victim is has changed as a result from the security sector, has changed as a result of our intervention. Because the chief of security, in fact, in our context, once told us, Mama, we are also victims. We soldiers are victims of your people who know and see the Boko Haram, but they allow them come to harm us without even intimating us. Are we not victims, Mama? And then the extremists Boko Haram themselves will tell us, Mama, we are victims of your society's injustices. And then, of course, Alamin Foundation has all the community of victims and survivors of the conflict. So in the context of Nigeria, in fact, everybody now claims to be a victim. So we said, okay, now, since all of us are victims, let's sit down and then talk. And then that the military opens up to us that, Mama, if you see us doing anything wrong, please let us know, which we feel is a progress. In fact, it has never happened in the history of security sector in Nigeria. And then another aspect, another result that I feel we have achieved is realization of the potentials of women. Yes, women in our context are always in the background. I can remember one of our head of states in an international interaction in Germany saying his wife, her place is in the other room only. So this is really the context of Nigeria. Women are just for the other room cooking and then caregiving. But then in the context of our intervention, the military has now completely changed that, saying, in fact, thank you for doing our work. We were surprised when they said that. We said, no, we are working for you. They said, no, but for you people, we people would not have known the kind of issues you people are bringing forth. In fact, one of the military commanders now, in fact, when we went for an interaction, he now requested to come and brief him. So I went with my network of women who have we have de-radicalized, to give him first-hand information on the context, because the women told us that the suicide bombing we are witnessing are women whose husbands have been killed, who are now taking revenge because they believe the people who are the hybrid forces and the militia who are supporting the soldiers are luring their men and killing them. So, in fact, for the first time, the military commander was able to get first-hand information. This is the reason for suicide bombing, that our fellow women are undertaking it as a revenge, so that it's left for them now to strategize to avoid some of those things. And they vividly told him this is what should be done. In fact, de-radicalizing them or reorienting your age will go a long way. So, in fact, and then the military commander now, in fact, being open and then listening to us to understand what is actually taking place, invited us to his office to listen. And then I went still with those same survivors. In fact, the military now even funded my organization, said, Mama, we thank you very much. Go and continue doing, scale up your peace building work. Which is, in fact, we know, in fact, I don't think if there is any civil society organization in Nigeria that can open its mouth and say the military has supported them with physical cash to go and continue, because they have seen the value peace building has brought to them. And then, in fact, through this, in fact, now sitting with the military, we have enlightened them to understand. And then the Women Horizon has been reshaped to appreciate that really the military also are human like us, but it's circumstances. And now, given the opportunities, they are able to enlighten them. And then the perspective, the negative perspective that Nigerian military is worse than the extremist Boko Haram, is giving way to our sons, calling them their sons, and then offering to, in fact, partner with them. And then, in fact, the military in that partnership also accorded Alamin Foundation, my foundation, a surrender pathway. When the women now complain to him that when there are people surrender from the bush, of course, those who want to come down, the extremists who want to come out of the bush were intercepted and killed, then he said, please tell this foundation, let us know in good time so that we can arrange soldiers and devise a way of going to welcome them safely back into the communities. This we paved our way through our relationship with the military. And then the military in our context also opened the detention facility. In fact, the detention facility was hitherto referred to House of Horror. In fact, nobody, in fact, accessed it. But with our partnership, now the military has opened that, giving us security clearance to go and come in and then train, go into the female detention cell, and then train our female detainees so that they can start earning like their male counterparts while they are still behind the bars. And then the military also, in fact, yes, they were open to dialogue. In fact, when we went and briefed the highest military hierarchy in Nigeria, he now directed his chief of defense, civil military cooperation, and senior military officials to come down to the Northeast and then to come down to our office and meet with these survivors and then see what they can do. In fact, when his colleagues suggested that why can't we approach the state government, he said, no, let us see what we as the military can do on our own. Then we meet the government to see and then inform them this is what we have done, and then ask them to bring their widow's mite. And then our interventions have led to the subsequent release of minors. In fact, nobody knew that there is a cell for minors within the detention facility until we started going. One of the commanders said, please go and hide mama, go and talk to those in that cell. They are minors and we don't have business keeping minors here. And when we went, in fact, for 3 days, I cannot sleep. We discovered young men, all of them below 20, and they have stayed for over 7 years. And then he said, in their record, initially when they were detained, their ages were written 18 and 20. And he said, if we release them now, people will start accusing us that the military is releasing Boko Haram. Please, Mama, help us to get these children out of here. So you see, they have now seen the value of what partnership with women can do, and then even telling us their inner challenges that they are facing also as military. And then our going opened the way for many families who have lost their relation. Of course, I told you we have networks of wives of young men who have been arrested and disappeared. And then when we went with some of these young women, we discovered over 900 of their husbands who have been arrested and who the women believe that were dead for long. And then we discovered that they are there alive. And then we brought also our widows' mite to support the military to start this thing. Connect them with their families and others, so that that impact alone changed completely the narrative of civil military cooperation in our context. So, in fact, the funding we were getting isn't it much, but then the value we are adding to a situation and even completely changing a narrative, bad impression, the negative narrative our people had about this military forces is honestly very, very overwhelming. And therefore, in this regard, then, I have to now go to the recommendations to recommend a few of what I feel, in fact, our members of international communities and donors what they can do more. In fact, they have been doing, but then we want them to focus on. In fact, like our system of relationship with the ICAN Wasal network, Sanam's NGO, in fact, she has been funding us, is a kind of, what do I say? Flexible funding. Yes, you are the people on ground, you know better what it is. So therefore, this is the fund, it is left for you to account for it properly and then seek for interventions that will bring out positive incomes. So therefore, I'm calling on the international community and donor agencies to provide more direct and then flexible funding, so that allowing lasting changes, because for the local partners to implement what they feel is most suitable for their communities and societies. And then the shift, I will also recommend the shift of power and resources. Yes, to women, local women-led organization, as the ICAN Wasl is doing, because yes, they were granted, but they are subletting. In fact, this minimizes even the expenses of managing, going to set up an office, country offices in all over the world. You have identify reliable, credible partners, and then the focus of funding. Let you now be subletting those fundings to those organizations so that they can be achieving. In fact, when Sanam is talking about, all along she was talking about the outcomes and then the achievements and the successes of her partners, and that is hers. And it is, of course, credit. It should be a credit to her. And then I will also recommend amplifying the voices and visibility of women peace builders. Yes, in Nigeria, in fact, yes, I am locally rooted, as Sanam says, but we are getting globally global connection through ICAN Wasl network. And that global connection at all, although we are religious people, but as to our security, for example, now being me, I'm sort of being seen, seated to the UK defense attaché in Nigeria, training military. In fact, it adds to our security and then the visibility of women peace builders, so that the governments in corrupt contexts like ours now can impact, can give you at least a space. And then networking and partnership is very, very important. Yes. So in fact, the FCDO in Nigeria, they said this is the first time they are funding any local organization, simply because they realize that my organization is the only one that has all the community of victims and survivors of the conflict. So therefore, they said all interventions must be human rights based, victims and survivor centered, and we have it. So therefore, they said, in spite of the fact that we are a small organization, they started funding us, and this has gone a long way. In fact, comparing the magnitude of funding the international community gives to bigger NGOs, UN agencies, INGOs. In fact, what we were given is just like a drop in the ocean, in the ocean. But because we are there, we are at the grassroots, what we achieve cannot be measured against the millions that were allocated to them. And then advocacy and solidarity also is very, very important. Yes, encourage our governments. Governments, political government in corrupt contexts like ours, yes, they need to be encouraged by the international community members, yes, to be impact. See the wisdom in partnering or working with civil society actors. And then the international community should also demonstrate solidarity for the actions like ICAN is doing, like the Alliance for Peace Building is now doing. It is promoting our work. And then in other ways, in fact, maybe even strengthening, although the legitimacy is there, but it is further strengthening our legitimacy and then our relevance across. Yes, no matter what, I don't have the resources to make my voice be heard in the presence of over 100, about 130 listeners, unless, but for the partnership between Alliance for Peace Building and then the ICAN Wasl network. So these are the kind of things. And then lastly, I think protect and then safeguarding women peace builders is very, very important. I talked about it a little, but then yes, relationship with international community, the recognition, the showing of solidarity, the encouragement of our the works, amplifying the voices of women peace builders, and then giving them platform to be seen and be heard, honestly goes a long way. And then it serves as a protection for us also. So, and then lastly, I said, encourage and support the integration of the WPS agenda into policies and planning frameworks, ensuring adequate funding. Yes, international community has been funding governments across both our states and federal national governments. So therefore, encourage them to make it a priority to include the WPS agenda. Yes, it is there in name, but then the funding is not adequate. because currently even ministries of women affairs in the contexts I am operating do cry that they don't even have resources to observe the 25th anniversary. So therefore, I think this, let me leave the stage a little for my colleague Wasma to come in and then share her perspective on this, and then maybe we'll move on from here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Hamsatu. Those were incredible recommendations, all very much on point. And just to tie a thread between your comments and Sanam's on the funding, we are at a moment of great change in the international, foreign assistance, ODA environment. And maybe it's time to use this as an opportunity. We've been talking about localizing peace building assistance and development assistance for many, many years, and it's really not happened at the government level. There's, incredible organizations like ICAN and others that do fund local peace builders and are dedicated to that flexible funding model. But it certainly wasn't happening at scale at the major multilateral and bilateral level. So maybe this is an opportunity to rethink those type of procurement mechanisms and everything from requests for proposals to how dollars and euros and other currency get out the door. It'll be a challenge, but maybe there is something that we can do constructively in this sort of moment of upheaval. But Wajma, I'd love to turn to you with the same question. I'd love to hear some of the major impacts of your work, as well as the key lessons learned and recommendations that you have for other women peace builders, donors in the international community.
I want to start with saying that the women that we have been working within, like the women who have worked with the security sector, with the community, as well as the government, I'm still working with like so many of those women in Afghanistan. The expertise that they have and the engagement that they used to have in the past, they have actually channeled it into the different community initiatives right now, where they are supporting women. They are creating, home-based, for example, initiatives, providing immediate support to, for example, victims and survivors of domestic violence, addressing some like immediate challenges like forced marriages of younger girls, which is like very much increasing. So that is some also that's tied that we have, like, for example, a lot of people think that the 20 years, because the international community was engaged in Afghanistan, we were very much making a lot of progress, and then the Taliban came in, like we are a failed cause. No, hundreds and thousands of women are working inside Afghanistan right now and trying to use the expertise and the skills they created in the past to, address the challenges today, maybe in a different way. So in terms of the impact of our engagement with the security sector, so very much similar to what Hamsatu has been talking about, when we created the platform of dialogue between security sector and the communities, at first, of course, there were times that we thought the police chief was going to be beaten by the community members. The first meeting was so hard to even, contain that level of anger and frustration, because people were very much upset that the police district, for example, district chief had never talked to the community. They were engaged only very much with the, power, powerful men in the community, who were also very much, they had their security guards, they had their, armed men going around in the community, creating safety challenges for people, creating, violence and intimidation and a lot of fear and harassment that was very much, daily life reality for so many people in the community. So there was so much anger. But it started, kind of calming down as we moved along, because we were able to create, that space for that peaceful dialogue, at least, and eventually people started telling them about their challenges. So one of the areas that we made a lot of progress was the night raids. So NATO and say our security forces was very much engaged in these night raids. So they would like ambush a house that is considered to be an enemy, or considered to be a terror, a sort of resource intelligence that they had received from somewhere, or maybe somebody who was like an enemy with that family. They reported them, and then there was like an ambush to their house. Their doors would be broken. The kids would be, very much horrified with that. And women's clothing would be all around the way they were doing the searches, and all very much like men, military men. So when we had our community conversation, the women started telling the police forces, the security sector, both like from intelligence as well as the police, including their NATO advisors, that your raids are so inhuman. The way you raid into homes are creating more of insurgents in our homes. Our sons are turning against the government. Our sons become so much, this is like that grievance that you create is very much strong. So we started working with NATO around guidelines for night raids, trying to prevent it as much as possible. And then they started realizing that, oh, we don't have women. If we go to these homes, like who would start, the connection or talking to women? So then they had to bring in, and that's how NATO introduced the female engagement teams, the FETs. They were like international NATO advisors and NATO and female members who actually engaged with our security forces to decrease the level of hostility that they exhibited in the night raids. Another area that we made a lot of progress was the juvenile correction centers. Amsatu also mentioned about, like, when we went to the juvenile centers where the younger boys under the suspicion of terror are being kept, there was sexual abuse, there was, like a lot of violence that they were going through, and they had no access to their families. So the mothers started, engaging with the guys who were responsible, and we created the family connection so that these boys can actually meet with their families. And that is how we found out, the level of very dark stories that came up about how these younger boys and these young men were subject to sexual abuse and sexual violence, and so much of drug addiction and all of that. So a lot of our advocacy changed so much of that situation within those areas. Reintegration was another area where, for example, they had identified these former combatants and they had no idea what to do with them. And then they thought that maybe we would provide them with cash so that they can actually go and make their lives. But the women groups within their own families went and contacted their families, identified their mothers, their wives, the families of them. And then we proposed to the government to provide land and housing to them instead of cash, because that would help the whole family to get the benefit, and not just one combatant who can actually use that cash against very much their own for different reasons, and there could be a relapse. So I think, the safety that improves creates trust within the communities. And that's the biggest, achievement that I think women peace builders bring. And we saw it in our own, experience, that the trust initial levels that, for example, in our office, we couldn't go have our meetings in the police stations, or, for example, in the Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Defense, or within the national security departments. People would not even try or want to enter. So they would say, we will come to your office and then meet them, but we will not go to their offices. That was the level of, that lack of trust and the lack of engagement that communities had with the peace and security forces. So the trust that we started building, between these actors and the community was so key. That's why the neighborhood watch, for example, initiative that was very much that came out of our dialogues, where we created these committees of the police, safe security, intelligence, defense, the community. So the schools are there, the municipality is there, for example, departments of health are there. For example, families were talking about at night when they had an emergency, or there was a pregnant woman being taken to the hospital. The police checks were very, very much hostile to them. They would say, show me the pregnant woman, let me see her belly if she's actually pregnant. That was the language that they used to use. And the man and the family would get so defensive, and they would start beating them, and there would be lots of violence. So we started actually removing those security checks from the community as part of the neighborhood watch initiatives that we started. So I think that the trust part was so critical, but at the same time, addressing some of the immediate needs of the community, because it's all about safety, right? That the community is asking for safety. When my daughter is going to school, I want to make sure that, there are no, these local armed men who are stopping her or who are harassing her, or there's no, for example, sort of, hostility on the way. Or for example, if a female doctor is going to her work, she's expecting the same. So we started actually using a lot of community local challenges, trying to addressing them, and those were very much based on safety. But that helped us expand, that helped us understand to get into the security. For example, in 2021 we had around 22, 23 female deputy governors who were in each province based on our work and our advocacy in Afghanistan. And they became part of the National Security Council. So when there were discussions about security issues and security challenges within the community, they brought, these were the women that we had worked with and we had engaged in. The training was also a major area. For example, when we worked with the police officers, with the security officers who had really no idea how to work with communities, how to talk to a woman, because many of them actually, this was a voluntary recruitment. It was a recruitment that, a lot of people who were just armed men who were like part of, local mafias, local thugs, local different, armed groups, they turned into the police. They became police officers, and suddenly, they got the gun and the opportunity to and the power. So that actually they had no idea how to engage with the communities. That's again, where women groups in our, network, we provided we offered them that, okay, we can work with your police officers, trying to make them understand what the community looks like. And I remember the days that when I entered the Ministry of Interior, the police officer would start singing for me. That was their form of harassment. And then there was a time that I was like, I had an office inside the Ministry of Interior, because they had offered our organization to have an office there, because they said like, that's how we can come to you. And we had seconded like a number of advisors for the Ministry of Interior, particularly for the Department of Gender and Gender-Based Violence. So that is also, a very, very much important area, the training, the providing, support and skills to them. And in terms of the recommendations, just to wrap up, I think funding, who can talk better than Sanam about our challenges, the funding is a major challenge, of course, on how to engage with the security sector. But at the same time, we also need to take this local knowledge to an international level. Like, for example, even now, like when I'm invited to the NATO conferences and the NATO meetings, I see how much of a WPS agenda has fallen down their attention, and even within the countries, like, for example, we are talking about G7 countries and their, military engagements. There's a lot of focus just on, arming, improving our arms, creating more drones, having more ammunitions. And you do not see, like, sometimes when I'm invited to, events at G7 level, I hardly hear anything about the community safety, about the issues that we need to ensure, like forget about NAP or even WPS agenda, for example, even though all of these countries have a NAP. So we need to bring this, this local knowledge and local expertise, people like Hamsatu and so many, like the experiences that we have on the ground, to an international conversation around peace and security, because the security of the as you see it very well, that the international security actually outlook is very, very much volatile right now. Whoever is more armed actually is more stronger, but then they cannot create that stability. And even in countries that we thought, oh, democracy is very strong, it's very fluid. Democracy is being, very much impacted, and you never know how much of these rights and freedoms we are going to lose, and the face of this militarization that we are experiencing. So I very much hope that we can bring this conversation to an international level as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wajma. I really appreciate your insights. And actually, you teed up my last question for Sanam really well. So Sanam, what do we need to do to operationalize this type of work described by Hamsatu and Wajma more widely and across diverse contexts? And then how do we make sure engagement and partnerships between security forces and women peace builders doesn't become tokenized, as too often has been the case in other efforts to implement the WPS agenda?
Thank you. I think it has both kind of, there's a local dimension and a global dimension. And by that, I mean that what we're seeing, I mean, I think both what Wajma and actually Wajma, the Afghan experience, I really think needs to be unpacked so much more, because the narrative for 20 years about international engagement in Afghanistan was it's all a failure, it's just a waste of time, it's a waste of money. And it was only in 2021 when when the Taliban takes over that we all see, wow, in 20 years, look at how many women judges and what justice system, women and men were there, and the police and so forth. I mean, yes, there were mistakes that were made, but you guys were also trying to correct those mistakes on the ground. And there seems to be little appetite to even kind of reflect and learn and say, what does that mean going forward, whether it's for NATO or for any national army or military, or or even for our own international security assistance. So for example, when I think about the billions that the UK, the EU, the US has spent on supposedly security training and military training in Nigeria, what effect did those billions of pounds and dollars have compared to what Hamsatu is doing, trying to solve the same problem, right? Trying to address the problem of Boko Haram. And what we find repeatedly is that, and it's been, this, we know in the US context, we've talked about this a lot, but we've always said you have to have the protection of communities and human security and human rights at the core of every kind of military and security training, right? It can't just be a half-hour, half-assed attempt that of somebody coming in and throwing jargon at a bunch of soldiers in a 3-week course, in a 3-month training course. It has to be central, and then it has to be integrated in everything that they're thinking and doing, because given that the wars or the security threats that we're facing are integrated in our communities, right? It's not that you go to war on a border somewhere and there's a battlefield somewhere else and you don't even think about it. It is the setting of any security concern right now is civilian settings. Civilians are the majority of the victims. If you as the security sector are going to be part of the problem, whether it's being a perpetrator of violence, whether it's raping, whether it's pillaging, whatever it is that you do, then you're going to cause a reaction. And that reaction is going to be militancy, gangs being formed, vigilante groups, et cetera, et cetera. So our security actors need to be at the forefront of protecting human rights and being a service, not a force, but a service, right? So that's part of the advocacy that we need to be doing at an international level for the countries, or for those of us who have militaries and security sector sort of actors that are going off and supposedly training people in Nigeria and so forth. So that's, as I say, humanizing security, like put the human being at the center of whatever security intervention you're about to consider, and figure out what happens if you, as you say, you raid their house and radicalize them because of the way you've treated them, right? These things are happening everywhere as we speak. So one side is what we can do. Then the other side is what we can do to enable people like Hamsatu and Wajma and many of our other partners. We have partners in Uganda, we have partners in as is Cameroon and Sri Lanka and Pakistan, all these places where our partners are working from the ground up to engage their own security actors and speak their own language. So I suspect that what Hamsatu has been able to do in Nigeria is probably 15 times more effective than a lot of the parachuting in of foreign military guys who come in and speak the language of military, but actually don't have any rootedness in the culture or the context and so forth. It makes a difference. It makes a difference to have the resource and the just the wisdom that comes from the local angle. And so we need to enable that. And then we from where we sit at ICAN and AFP and others, our job is connecting. I think it's creating and convening and creating spaces. When we did our workshop in New York back in March of 2024, and my colleague Helena can speak to that. And you know, maybe when she was framing, I think she was sharing this. We had, first of all, it took over a year to convince the security and military attaches at the UN, at various missions, to even pay attention to what we were saying. And then finally, it was like, okay, we're doing a meeting. It's going to be 1 day, 1.5 days. The first morning, half of these guys didn't show up because they didn't know what they were showing up to. And, you know, so then eventually they show up. By the end of the first day, they were like, "Oh my God, we've never met people like this." Or it was, we always assumed, you know, there was always like NGOs are the enemy kind of you know, it was, they just had never come across this sector. And we were sitting there thinking, this is exactly the problem, because the minute you actually convene, you see how much conversation and how much commonality we have, much more so than with diplomats, frankly, because diplomats cycle in and cycle out. They're sitting in the capitals. They very rarely have anything to do with sort of on the ground issues. Politicians, forget it. Our internet, the politicians here who have no idea that a Hamsatu exists or a Wajma exists. But the military, who are the ones who are being instrumentalized to go out and do this work, they're on the ground. I've met, you know, I remember meeting British military who were being sent to Afghanistan, and they were saying, oh, you know, one guy said to me, oh, I don't tell my mum when I'm being deployed because she would get worried, right? So he's somebody's kid that is being sent out to Afghanistan to be on some mission that he has no idea why he's doing it, but they were committed because they cared about the Afghan people. They cared about Afghan women. So we need to convene these spaces of bringing people together more and more from our side and their side. And then the other part of this, which years ago we were trying to initiate a project, and maybe this is the time to think about it again, was that we were saying that in any context you have violence being perpetrated by different actors. You know, as I say, there can be gangs, there can be militias, there can be interpersonal violence of various sorts. These things are there and they need to be prevented. One thing that's really important is that our national security sector, whether it's your police, your intelligence, your army, and others, they should not be amongst the enablers, the abettors, the aiders, or the perpetrators of violence. And so we were thinking about a global campaign where we were asking, you know, it was like devise like a statement or a charter that on the ground we could take to our police forces and say, hey, you as a national police force, do you commit to ensuring, you know, protection, preventing sexual violence and harassment, etc. You know, you will be there to serve and protect the community and women and children and others, right? And that you will not rape, you will not kill, you will not torture, you will not, you know, all these things that they're not meant to do, and get them to sign that pledge, right? And then have a global framing around it of us, you know, as governments, I mean, as civil society internationally, but also as the UN and others, that we would hold them accountable. So you have an umbrella from the top that's connecting, but really the accountability from the bottom. Because if they sign a pledge that says, I will not torture, kill, you know, rape, and organizations like Hamsatu's are on the ground, connected internationally, so they have the protection and the backup from all of us, but are on the ground face to face with these guys, and they do commit a crime, then they can hold them accountable. You know, there's a level of accountability. Also, frankly, if the police in a country doesn't want to sign a pledge that says, I will not torture, I will not rape, that already tells you a lot about them, right? Because these are baseline things that are, you know, why are they there? They're there to protect the society. And so we need to create bridges and ways in which we can talk as human beings with a concern for the well-being of our society, because they also, we have to acknowledge, they also, you know, pledge to the Constitution. They're making a pledge to protect. But the question is, what are they protecting? Are they protecting the people, or are they protecting the politicians? And these are the conversations that we could be having collectively and opening up the space. And I think that there's a huge amount of interest from the security sector, because I don't think most of them want to be bad guys, right? They want to be good, you know, they have signed up for, you know, I would imagine many of them have signed up because they want to serve their country. So we have to humanize them. They have to humanize us. And then collective, together, we should be humanizing security and maybe challenging the political forces and the weapons industry forces and others that are actually trying to take us in a different direction.
Thank you, Sanam. One of my favorite quotes from the report is about how we need a common language. And this is such an opportunity, this moment, to convene with those security actors to start speaking the same language. We're having the same kind of conversation with the private sector right now. How can they be constructive actors in this moment as well? And it starts with language. So I know we're in a bit of a challenging context, but it could be an opportunity, one that's been a little overlooked. We've been working on making sure women were, in parliaments and in elected office, which is of course extremely important. But this space has been, as I started, very focused on retention and recruitment processes. Now it's time to go to the next level and make that connection with civil society. So,
and just Megan, just to add, because I think Mohammed in the comments is saying about the cultural dynamics in our, that's another thing that when you bring from the local with with your own local security actors, with your own local community leaders, with your own local faith leaders, you begin to challenge and question and raise these issues, because there is no society that can survive long term if the practice is being incredibly violent to your own, right? Or stealing from yourself. So these culture, a lot of what has been perceived as culture is not culture. It's about power. It's about breaking taboos. It's about practices that have been introduced that really are destroying communities as opposed to fostering social cohesion. But we can only begin to challenge and address these things if we have spaces for the dialogue. And so the conversations at a local level and a regional and international level are also really important, and the models of practice that people have. So, I think there's huge scope for ongoing work around peace building, and this holistic approach.
Yeah. And there's certainly some sort of large lessons, I think, that we've even talked about today that are very evident in the report. But, having that local connection, that community connection is how you get tailored, contextually relevant responses and approaches, right? So that's where we get away from the instrumentalizing of the international community and the parachuting in and all the bad things about peace building that have been going on for too long. Again, another opportunity to really ground this work and really move the agenda and human security and humanizing security forward. So thank you all. I appreciate, we're a little over time, so appreciate all of you hanging with us for a few extra minutes. But Sanam, Hamsatu, Wajma, Helena, Isabella, everyone who joined us online today, so appreciative of your time. Thank you for everything you do. Happy WPS month. Happy almost 25th anniversary. Lots of work to do. So look forward to working with all of you as we try to move this agenda forward. So thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.